Alright guys, so on this segment, we all gonna be discussing on HTML forms. So HTML forms is important, especially if you are dealing something on the database or something that you will get or post request. So for example, the username and password of a certain website or web application. You should log in first before you can use the application. So in Facebook, YouTube, and lots of the application online, they are using forms to collect data. Of course, in Facebook and YouTube, you will log in first your credential before you can use the application or app. Okay, so that's gonna be our topic on this segment. So example here, we have the input, first name, last name, state, drop down. Okay, so this would be our focus on this tutorial to create some HTML forms. Okay. Alright then, so HTML forms are used to collect users' inputs such as data or informations to be used. So if you are doing something on the database such as querying data or inserting data, then these HTML forms are gonna be used and it is helpful to you. Okay, so let's say for example inside the body, so we will create a form. Okay? Oops, uppercase form like so. So I will be deleting this. We will be using this later on. So those are attributes, especially if you are doing something with the database. Okay, so inside the form, this area. Okay, so this area is for the forms elements. Okay, so HTML forms contains form elements. Okay, so the form elements are different types of input elements such as checkboxes, ready buttons, submit buttons, and many more. So hopefully we could discuss some of those inputs which is commonly used of some programmers or web developers. Okay, so first input that we are going to introduce is the input type. Okay, so let's say for example input type text. Okay, so that's the first input type that we are going to introduce. So input type text defines a one-line input field for the text input. So you can input anything, especially the text. You can also input number, special characters, and many more. Okay, so let me erase this one. Okay, so next thing that I am going to put is the attribute ID and username. Okay, so aside from type attribute, so I will be adding ID and name attribute. So let's say for example ID, then I will give specific name of the ID such as username, username, and the name attribute, so I will be naming it username also. Okay, so the purpose of ID attribute is important, especially if you are playing around with the JavaScript. So if you are calling this ID for specific function, and of course we need to use this also for calling the label attribute. Okay, and for the username and for the attribute name, so this attribute name is important also because you can use this for database query. Okay, so let's save this and preview it on the browser. Okay, so there you go. There is an input. Okay, so the next thing that we need to provide for the input is the label because we don't know what is the purpose of this input. So we need to add label HTML tag to support the input. Okay, so let's say for example label, and then this attribute 4 is gonna be target what would be the specific ID of the input field. So let's say for example the target is this input type text which has the ID of username. So I will be calling the ID username, and then I will provide content. So let's say for example username, and let's preview this on the browser. So there you go. Username. Oops, we misspelled this. Username. There you go. Okay, so next input that I am going to introduce is the email input. Okay, so let's say for example, input, and then I will provide attribute type, which is email. Okay, so I will provide also ID attribute, email, and name attribute, and the name is email also. Okay, so I will provide also label for this email. Okay, so label for email, and the content is the email. Okay, so the best thing about this input element is that the browser can determine whether it is an email or not. So I will show this later. Okay, so let's save this and preview on the browser. Oops, like so. And then I will add BR to next line, so that this email and label will be placed next line. Save, and there you go. Okay, so next element on input that I am going to introduce is the password. Okay, so let's say input, and then inside this attribute type, so I will be putting password. Okay, and then ID, the ID, of course, the password, and the name is password also. Okay, so before that, I will be assigning label for the password input. Label, and then for password, and then password. Okay, so let's save this one. Actually, this password input is used for security purposes. That's why the inputs is in a form of asterisk. Okay, so let's save this and preview on the browser. There you go. So if you are typing something, then that is in a form of asterisk for security purposes. Okay, so next input that I am going to introduce is the radio button. So it lets the users select only one of the limited number of choices. Okay, so let's say for example, paragraph, select gender. Okay, so down, I will create input. Input, inside this attribute, I will say radio, and then the name, name is gender. The value is male, and after this I will create or add the text. Let's say male. Okay, and then brick, BR, so that it would proceed next line. Then I will be copying this down. Okay, paste, and I will be changing this into female, and then I will be changing this into female also. And I will be copying this again and paste it down. Then let's say I will use this radio also. The value is other, or others, or other. And then I will be changing this into other. Okay, and then let's preview this on the browser. Save and preview this on the browser. There you go. So you could select among these choices. Okay guys, so you could put a default check attribute. So this another the purpose of this attribute is to have a default check on your radio button. Okay, save and then refresh, then there you go. So this is the default check of your radio. Okay. Okay, so next element that I am going to introduce is showing the select option. Okay, so let's say for example, I will add first the label for the select option. Okay, so let's say select age range. Okay, and then I will assign this for age, and then down. This is where I could input select. So select, and then the name, let's say age, and then the ID is age. Okay, so inside the select, this is where you could put your option. Okay, so option, the value, let's say 15 to 30, and then 15 to 30. Okay, so I will be copying this option so that I could paste it down. And then the other option is 30 to 60. And the value, of course, I will be changing to 30 to 60. Okay? So this is the option, two options under the So these are the two options under the select option. Okay, so the 15 to 30 and 30 to 60. So let's save this and preview it on the browser. Save and refresh. So there you go, guys. Then you could select among these two options. Okay. Okay, so the next thing that I am going to introduce, guys, is the comment. So the comment is just like a guide of your codes or a text that reminds you. So, but the code does not have a function on the specific page. That is just a guide of your codes. So, this is the comment. Okay, so this is how to write a comment. Okay? Okay, so the next element of input that I am going to discuss is the submit button. So the purpose of this button, if we hit the submit, it would collect the data inside the inputs and do something like get data or post data in the database. So I will be showing this shortly. Okay, so how to write the code for the submit button. So let's say input. And then this attribute type, let's say submit. Okay, then name, submit, and the value, let's say save. Okay, let's save this one and preview it on the browser. So there you go, guys. So if I am going to hit the button submit, and then the data that I have entered is being transferred here in the URL. Okay? So next thing that I am going to introduce, guys, is the reset button. So it would reset or refresh the form inputs. Okay? So let's say input, and then refresh or reset, and then the value, refresh, and let's try to preview this on the browser. Refresh, and there you go. So if I am going to input something here and then refresh, then everything will be refreshed or reset. Okay? Okay, guys, so those are some inputs that usually used or commonly used by some programmers or web developers. Actually, guys, there are still lots of inputs that you could use in a form. All you need to do is to research, like color, date, month, number, search, time, URL, and week. Okay, so all you need to do is to type the input or input, and then put it here inside the attribute type, whatever the input type that you are using. Okay? So, see you next tutorial.